Protests against the April 2009 Moldovan parliamentary election, known in Romanian as Revolta de la Chișinău, began on 7 April 2009, in major cities of Moldova before results were announced. The demonstrators claimed that the elections, which saw the governing party of Communists of the Republic of Moldova win a majority of seats, were fraudulent, and alternatively demanded a recount, a new election, or resignation of the government. Similar demonstrations took place in other major Moldovan cities, including the country's second-largest, Bălţi, where over 7,000 people protested. Some of the protesters discussed and organized themselves using an online social network service, Twitter, hence its moniker used by the media, the Twitter Revolution. In Chișinău, where the number of protesters rose above 30,000, the demonstration escalated into a riot on 7 April. Rioters attacked the parliament building and presidential office, breaking windows, setting furniture on fire and stealing property. Background: the unrest began as a public protest after the announcement of preliminary election results on April 6, 2009, which showed the Party of Communists of the Republic of Moldova victorious, winning approximately 50% of the votes. Final results, published on April 8, showed that the PCRM garnered 49.48% of the vote, gaining 60 parliament seats, one less than the 3/5 required for the party to control the presidential election. The opposition rejected the election results, accusing the authorities of falsification in the course of counting the votes and demanded new elections. The PCRM has been in power since 2001. A series of protests have been organized by opposition parties in 2003, when the government attempted to replace the school subject, History of the Romanians, with History of Moldova. Students protested for months before the government backed down on its plans. Petru Negura, a university professor of sociology at the Moldova State University and the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences, France, attributed the origins of the crisis to the ethnic identity problem. Some people in Moldova identify themselves as Moldovans, while others as Romanians. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe International Election Observing Mission declared the elections generally free and fair, although it also reported that the comparison of data on the voting age population provided by the Moldovan Ministry of the Interior with the number of registered voters provided by local executive authorities revealed a discrepancy of some 160,000. A member of the OSCE observation team, Emma Nicholson, disagreed with the assessment of the OSCE report on the fairness of the elections. A number of voters have also reported cases of fraud where deceased and non-attendant persons were registered as having voted. According to Vladimir Sokol, a political analyst for the Jamestown Foundation, the elections were evaluated as positive on the whole, with some reservations not affecting the outcome or the overall initial assessment. Exit polls had showed a comfortable win for the Communist Party, with the only uncertainty being the size of the winning margin. Opposition parties pointed out that the lists of eligible voters included 300,000 more people compared to the previous elections, although the population of Moldova has been shrinking. Due to this, they claimed that around 400,000 fictive voters have been created in the last 2 months and, therefore, changed the voting result. It was also claimed that the authorities have also printed more than one voting bulletin for certain persons. Demonstration and riot. The first demonstrations, organized as a flash mob by a 25-year-old Moldovan journalist Natalia Mora, began in Chișinău on April 6, 2009, with a larger number of demonstrators arriving on the next day, April 7. The demonstration, numbering over 10,000, most of them students and young people, gathered in the city center on Stefan Selmer Boulevard. The protest against the announced election results turned into clashes with the police, who used tear gas and water cannons. However, the police were soon overwhelmed by the number of the protesters. Rioters broke into the nearby Parliament building and the office of President. The building was retaken by the police later in the evening. The protesters, some of which carried Romanian flags, chanted pro-Western, pro-Romanian and anti-government slogans such as, "We want Europe," "We are Romanians," and "Down with communism." Two teenagers, Ion Galaci and Dragoș Mustetti, with the alleged approval of the policemen, replaced the flags of Moldova at the presidential and parliament buildings with a flag of Romania and a flag of Europe, claiming that they expected that this would calm the crowd. The emergency hospital of Chișinău reported treating over 78 injured police officers and protesters on April 8, while the Moldovan president stated that 270 people were injured in the riots. Moldovan opposition called on the authorities to carry out new elections and on the demonstrators to cease violence. Moldovan national television had initially reported that a young woman died of carbon monoxide poisoning due to the fires within the parliament building set off by the rioters. However, it was later reported that the woman was saved by a team of medics. On the evening of April 7, a group of protesters organized a National Salvation Committee, consisting of student and civic representatives. Writer Nicolae Dabia, a vice president of the committee, said that the intended purpose of the committee is to organize new elections. However, the protests died off as the police intervened during the night to arrest the protesters found in the square. On April 7, Serafim Eurician, leader of the opposition party Alliance Our Moldova, during a meeting with President Voronin, said that the riots were orchestrated by security services. However, former Moldovan President Petru Lucinski believes the violence was the spontaneous result of the actions of leaderless youths frustrated with the waning of Moldovan democracy. He said that there is no need to look further to explain the unrest, and the movement didn't have any leaders. One part went in one direction, a peaceful one, and another part took a violent turn. Protests of solidarity with demonstrators in Chișinău took place in Chișinău, Bălţi, Ungheni and other Moldovan cities. Conversely, in some cities the actions of the protesters were condemned. The protests continued on Sunday, April 12, when around 3,000 protesters gathered in the central square where the mayor of Chișinău, Dorin Cărtuacă, held a speech about how Moldova's youth reject communism because they understand that their future has been stolen. However, the students were notably absent from the crowd, having been sanctioned for their participation in the previous protests. Arrests and accusations of torture. On the night following April 7, around 1 a.m., police forces routed the remaining crowd in the main square and arrested about 200 participants. On the following day, more arrests were issued, with demonstrators beaten and transported away in police cars. Similarly, footage showed demonstrators getting dragged away and beaten by what appears to be plainclothes police officers. Among the protesters to be hospitalized after being beaten was Andreea Vantoc, formerly a political prisoner in Transnistria. An independent MP, Valentina Cusnea, was near the main street of Chișinău at about midnight on the 7th of April. She reported that she was abused by a police officer. Amnesty International accused the Moldovan government of violating human rights through the actions of the police, that it detained indiscriminately hundreds of protesters, including minors, who were subjected to torture and other ill treatment. The organization issued a memorandum to the Moldovan government about this case. On April 9, the Moldovan Prosecutor General's office asked Ukraine to extradite Gabriel Stati, a Moldovan businessman whom the Moldovan government accused of being involved in the organization and financing of the civil unrest. Stati was in Ukrainian custody along with another suspect, Aurel Marinescu, for their alleged involvement in organizing an attempt to overthrow the Moldovan government. On April 16, The General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine approved the extradition of Stati and Marinescu, Romanian journalists from Antena 3, TVR, and newspaper Gandul accused the Moldovan authorities of trying to intimidate them. On April 10, Moldovan authorities arrested journalist Rodica Mahu and Romanian journalist Oru Dendiu, the permanent correspondent of TVR in Moldova, for their alleged involvement in organizing the riots. However, Mahu and Dendiu were released from police questioning later that day, Dendiu being told that he must leave Moldova. Another journalist, Natalia Mora, was put under house arrest. Also, the internet access in Chișinău was blocked in reason to limit citizens' access to news sites. On April 11, the Moldovan Ministry of Internal Affairs announced it arrested 295 people in Chișinău for their involvement in the protests. On April 13, Chișinău Mayor Dorin Cărtuacă made an appeal to international organizations regarding the arrests in Moldova, claiming that the protesters had been tortured, not given the right to talk to a lawyer, and that NGOs were not allowed access to the detention centers. He also claimed that the real number of arrestees was higher than the official figures, as the list compiled by the press of missing protesters reached 800 names. A United Nations report, based on a visit to one detention center, said that the hundreds of people arrested following the civil unrest were subject to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, being beaten with clubs, water bottles, fists and feet, were denied food and access to legal counsel, and brought before judges in batches of 6 and collectively charged. The UN representatives were denied access to other detention centers, despite legislation which allows them to conduct such visits. Edwin Berry, the UN Human Rights Advisor for Moldova, said that during the visit to the detention center almost everyone he talked to had visible marks that show that they have been beaten. On April 15, President Voronin called for a general amnesty and an end to all forms of prosecution against participants in street protests. However, Cărtuacă announced that no protesters have been freed by April 17. Marian Lupu, the Speaker of Moldova's parliament, admitted that the arrested protesters were subjected to brutality from the police, and he announced that the police officers involved would not be punished, being covered by the amnesty announced by President Voronin. Deaths. 4 deaths occurred at the time of the unrest and have been linked to the events by various sources. Following his arrest, a 23-year-old protester, Valeriu Barboc, died in a Chișinău hospital on 8 April 2009. The official cause was smoke poisoning from the riot, but his family insisted that he was beaten to death by the police, his body being full of contusions. An investigation was opened into the case and a policeman was arrested on charges of Barboc's murder. As of November 2010, the case is still ongoing. The body of another protester, Ion Abulic, with multiple wounds and fractures, was allegedly dumped from a car belonging to the Moldovan Ministry of Internal Affairs. The body of a third protester, Eugen Apu, was handed to the relatives by the police on April 16. The official cause of death was given as suicide by hanging. However, the relatives disputed this because they claim that he had no marks on the neck to suggest this. According to Victor Sau, the mayor of Apu's home village Soroca, there is a link between Eugen Apu's death and the protest from April 7 because the police refused to provide further explanations and the dates of his death and the protests stay are the same. Sau stated that police refused to provide any explanations on the reasons behind the death of Eugen Apu, and that according to the papers he died on the 7th of April, the day when police begin the mass arrests of young protesters. The police say they found the decomposing body of Eugen Apu on the 15th of April, hanging from his bootlaces in the attic of a building in the capital. "They killed him, that's for sure, and they must answer for what they've done," said Eugen's father. Maxim Kanasev died on 8 April, but was found with his spinal column broken in Ghedaisi Lake only on 18 April. The Moldovan government strongly denied any involvement in the deaths. The executive director of Amnesty International Moldova, Evgeny Goloshepov, does not believe the minister's denials. 3 of the dead showed signs of violence on their faces and bodies. The causes of their deaths remain unknown as of 2010. On October 8, 2009, hundreds of people came to Stephen the Great Monument in Chișinău to march after 6 months from the bloody events. While attending the ceremony, the Prime Minister Vlad Filat said that the Ministry of the Interior has already started a domestic investigation into the police's actions on April 7, 2009 and especially during subsequent days and weeks. Government reaction. Moldovan President Vladimir Voronin, in an address on April 7, 2009, described the events in the capital as a coup d'état organized by a handful of fascists drunk with anger, and declared that the Moldovan authorities will defend themselves against the leaders of the pogrom. The president also urged the West to help restore order and resolve the conflict. Following the escalation of the riots and the burning of the parliament building, Voronin said, "We try to avoid bloodshed, but if yesterday's situation will be repeated, we will respond accordingly." Later on April 8, Voronin made the following statement. For the first time, the Moldovan people saw the opposition openly betray their own people and their own country by taking the path of provoking open civil war. The whole country saw that there is no opposition whatsoever in Moldova, neither anti-communist, nor anti-Voronin. There is only opposition to the state. The president also commented on the displaying of Romanian flags. "What happened yesterday brought indelible shame on our politicians, on the whole of our democracy. The entire Moldovan nation witnessed the greatest humiliation of its own sovereignty and its own democracy when the state standards were ripped from the flagpoles of parliament and the president's office and replaced with the flags of Romania." In an interview with the Spanish newspaper El País, Voronin claimed the professors and teachers, especially in Chișinău, have a very destructive role as continuators of Ion Antonescu. On 10 April 2009, Voronin called on the Constitutional Court of Moldova to authorize a recount of the votes. On 12 April 2009, it decided that there would be a recount. The recount was then set to take place on 15 April 2009. On 14 April, Serafim Eurician announced that the 3 main opposition parties would boycott the recount, citing fears that the government would use it to increase its majority to the 61 seats required to elect the next president. The recount is scheduled to finish by 16 April 2009 and results will be submitted by 21 April 2009 to the CEC. The result of the election was not changed through the recount, as no serious errors were determined. The opposition maintained that the ballot was rigged, saying that recounting fraudulent ballots could only yield fraudulent results. Transnistrian President Igor Smirnov accused the Moldovan government of failing to protect Transnistrians from nationalists. Diplomatic row with Romania. The civil unrest in Moldova led to a diplomatic row with Romania, after President Voronin accused Romania of being the force behind the riots in Chișinău. Romania denied all charges of being involved in the protests. The Romanian ambassador in Moldova, Filip Teodorescu, was declared persona non grata by the Moldovan government, being required to leave the country within 24 hours. The following day, the Romanian parliament nominated a senior diplomat, Mini Constantinescu, as the new ambassador to Moldova, but 2 weeks later, the Moldovan government rejected him without any explanation, deepening the crisis. The Moldovan government instituted visa requirements for Romanian citizens and closed the border between Romania and Moldova on April 7. Moldovan students studying in Romania and international journalists were not allowed to enter the country. The following day, train connections between Romania and Moldova were cancelled for an undefined period, because of technical issues. Romania announced that it will not reciprocate on the speaking of the ambassador and it will keep the same visa regime, with visas free of charge for Moldovan citizens. It also condemned as arbitrary and discriminatory the new measures brought against Romanian nationals in Moldova and has stated that the visa scheme was a reckless and broke a Moldova-EU pact. On a press conference from July 22, 2009, Moldova's state prosecutor, Valeriu Gurbilea, declared that Romania was not involved in the riot. The Romanian government changed the regulations which allow foreigners who had ancestors who had Romanian citizenship to gain the Romanian citizenship. The new law allows people with at least a Romanian great-grandparent to request Romanian citizenship, while it added a maximum term of 5 months for giving a response to the request.